You're listening to The Briefing, first broadcast on the 27th of September 2024 on Monocle Radio. Hello and welcome to The Briefing, coming to you live from Studio One here at Midori House in London. I'm Georgina Godwin. Ahead on today's programme,
we will continue to provide the security assistance Ukraine needs to succeed on the battlefield, as demonstrated by President Biden's significant announcement earlier today.
As the US announces $8 billion of aid and weapons for Ukraine, how seriously should Russia's nuclear threat be taken? The Liberal Democratic Party of Japan has a new leader and therefore a new prime minister. We'll cross to our Tokyo bureau to find out more about Shigeru Ishiba. We'll have a roundup of news from the Balkans, hear about the row over ownership of Germany's Commerzbank, and finally,
we learned that there had been a response to Russia's recent offer to beleaguered subjects of the decadent woke West to relocate to Russia, where it is promised there are no destructive neoliberal ideological attitudes.
Andrew Mueller will look back on the events of the week. All that right here on The Briefing with me, Georgina Godwin. Following the changes to Russia's nuclear weapons doctrine outlined by President Vladimir Putin this week, the Kremlin says this should be considered a signal to Western countries that there will be consequences if they participate in attacks on Russia. Maria Romanenko is a Ukrainian journalist who joins me down the line now. Maria, many thanks for coming on the show. How has Russia's nuclear doctrine changed?
Thanks so much for having me, Georgina. Well, Putin has announced yet another new red line, which will, of course, sit nicely alongside all the previous red lines that have been ignored. He extended his list of scenarios that could lead to Russia's using nuclear weapons, and he indicated that if the West allows Ukraine to strike deep into Russian territory with missiles such as an US-made ATACMS and British-made Storm Shadows, it may mean nuclear war.
And he was specific that these wouldn't have to be any kind of nuclear weapons. This would be an attack deep into Russia by any kind of weapon at all.
Yes, well, of course, Ukraine has shown when it did strike deep into Russia, they can do really well and they target military objects. So that's not, it is very clear why Ukraine is attacking deep into Russia. It's not to cause any sort of harm to civilians or anything. It is basically to make sure that the war that has been going on for, over 10 years now and in its full-scale stage for nearly 3 years, that it is to defeat Russia as a military state, which of course would benefit the whole world because at the moment Russia is a threat to the whole civilized world and not just to Ukraine.
I mean, Russia's clearly doing this because it now looks as if weapons, those long-range weapons, may be provided by Western states. But should it be considered a real threat or empty rhetoric?
Well, as I said previously, that it's just another red line in a long list of red lines that Putin previously mentioned. And of course, all of them have been ignored. And, different leaders and sort of representatives like, the NATO General Secretary, he said that it's not something to worry about, that he's done it all before. And if the US and UK provide this sort of permission to strike into Russia, that won't make them part of the conflict because Iran and North Korea have been providing weapons to Russia, and that doesn't make them part of the side of the war. And of course, Ukraine's foreign minister, Andriy Sybiha, he also said that it's just a bluff, we shouldn't worry about this because that's been said and done before. And of course, I think Russia will keep doing what they want to do regardless of the West's actions. So I think, it is very important to Ukraine to support Ukraine in a military way because that's the only way to end the war. And Russia is a risk to the whole world, regardless of what the West does. So we might as well try and make sure that Ukraine wins faster by giving it permission to defeat Russia as a military state.
So, I mean, yesterday the US announced that it would provide Ukraine with one of the largest aid packages. It totals almost $8 billion. They've also said they're going to boost air defence, including F-16 pilot training and, crucially, provide powerful new weapons, a type of glide bomb. And that's labelled long range by the administration. What is a glide bomb? Is it exactly the type of weapon that Russia's warned against using that would trigger repercussions?
Well, again, as I said, it's not about what Russia says, because Putin obviously has said many things about what's a red line for him and what he will do. But I don't think we should pay any attention to exactly what he says, because as the past has shown, that it's not really a real indicative of what they will do. Again, as the NATO General Secretary and Ukraine's foreign minister have said that Russia's actions don't really correspond to what they say, but also don't really correspond to what exactly has been done by the West or Ukraine. So
I wonder how much we can trust that, though. I mean, the UK is also considering allowing Ukraine to use British long-range weapons in Russia. How likely is it, do you think, they'll go ahead given Russia's threat? And although, yes, it could be empty rhetoric, it may not be.
Well, I think it'll be interesting to see what this $7.9 billion will cover. Of course, we've already been told the specifics of what the $2.4 billion bill from the US will cover, and that is air defense and air-to-ground and military drones and communication devices. I think today's meeting between Zelensky and Trump will be interesting because, of course, they've not met since 2019. And that meeting, the last one, didn't exactly go very well for Trump, and then did it. So I think we'll have to wait and see what's going to be discussed today with Trump as a potential future president of the US. But I think it was also very important that bill that Biden announced that he will provide before the end of his presidency will be very important. So I think we'll just wait and see. But as the US's support for Ukraine has been very, very important. And I really hope that as many decisions will be taken before potential threat of Trump's presidency, because, of course, he's said many things and he believes he can end the war. But from his previous actions, we can see that he very much likes to act as a Russian paw in this.
And if he did end the war, he would end it by giving Russia the territory that it wants. As you say, Zelensky's going to meet with him, but he's also met with various other world leaders on the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly. What's been the outcome of those various meetings?
Well, yeah, Zelensky definitely had a very busy week or busy few days in the US. He met with Biden yesterday with Kamala Harris, and on Wednesday, Zelensky spoke before the UN General Assembly. And earlier this week, Zelensky visited Pennsylvania's artillery factory where they make munition. This, of course, made some Republicans angry because they believed that it was that Ukraine singled out and kind of cut out Republicans. But of course, we now see that this meeting with Trump is happening. So it is quite clear that that wasn't intended to be the case. And of course, yesterday was announced the bill that I said before, the $2.4 billion bill. And of course, there's now indication of the $8 billion bill. So of course, all of this will help Ukraine militarily make it a stronger state so that Russia can finally be defeated as a military state in this war, because, of course, all we want is for peace to come sooner and for people to stop dying, because it's now, as I said, 3 years of the full-scale war. So anything that will help this sooner victory, I think, will be great, not just for Ukraine, but for the whole civilized world.
Maria, thank you. That was Maria Romanenko, a Ukrainian journalist. Now, here's Hassan Anderson with the day's other news headlines.
Thanks, Georgina. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will address the UN General Assembly later today. The speech comes as international calls for a ceasefire with Hezbollah and Hamas have seemingly faltered. Israel's defense minister rejected a potential deal yesterday. Sudan's army has launched strikes against its capital in the largest push to retake ground in nearly 17 months. In an address to the UN General Assembly, Sudan's army chief said his forces will support peace if the rival RSF ends its, quote, occupation. And Hurricane Helene has struck the US with 140-mile-per-hour winds. The storm is the strongest to ever hit Florida. Local authorities are leading evacuations and over 2 million people are without power. Those are the day's headlines. Back to you, Georgina.
Thanks, Hassan. The Liberal Democratic Party of Japan has a new leader and therefore a new Prime Minister. Former Defence Minister Shigeru Ishiba was announced as the winner of the party vote today, replacing Fumio Kishida, who announced his resignation in August. Well, Fiona Wilson, Monocle's Tokyo Bureau Chief, joins us now. Fiona, I understand as we're speaking, his press conference is going out. He's not the most stimulating of speakers, it has to be said.
Yes, well, he finished his press conference. I mean, look, he's a 12-time member of the Diet. He's tried to be Prime Minister. This is his 5th time. He said his final. He's certainly given it a good go. So he was very confident when he was speaking. He tends to be asked the same questions. And I think it was the end of a quite tiring campaign for him.
Of course. He's a former Defence Minister. What else can you tell us about him?
Well, so he represents his constituency on the Sea of Japan coast, Tottori. He's an interesting figure. He's been quite a divisive figure within the parliamentary party, and this has always been his Achilles heel. This is why he hasn't been able to win any of these votes, these elections to be Prime Minister. And you saw a bit of that today. He speaks his mind, which doesn't always go down well. He's made a few enemies within the party. He actually left the party at one point for 4 years, came back, and I think he's been seen as someone who maybe is a little bit too outspoken. He wants to, and he said this again today, he wants the LDP to return to a point where people can have free and open discussion. And I think the LDP has been in such a bad place with various scandals, the collapse of this famous faction system, which is really how the party has been run for years, where people were almost voting a bit like unions. They were voting in blocks. They would vote in these factions. The factions have been dismantled, apart from one faction run by Taro Aso, very, I think veteran is the only way to describe him, and he doesn't like Ishiba. So that was quite interesting to see today what was going to happen. He said, I'm not going to vote for Ishiba, but the members of my faction can do what they like. And I think after that, there was the first round, it was a bit unclear. It seemed that Sanai Takaichi might just make it as the first woman to be Japanese Prime Minister. She got 181 votes to Ishiba's 154. The runoff, it turned around. Ishiba got 215 and she got 194.
What are the domestic challenges he'll face immediately? I mean, you've mentioned problems within the party.
Yeah, I think, that's going to be his big challenge, party unity. And he knows he really has to have an election. He does actually have to have an election within about 13 months, but he needs to get a mandate from the public. The party's the polling is terrible. The public has got a pretty bad impression of this party that has dominated post-war Japan so massively. So that's his big thing. He's got to persuade the public that he is the safe pair of hands. And I think there's a feeling tonight that in the end, the party voted for the person they think can win that election. Ishiba has always been more popular with the public than within the parliamentary party. And I think there was an acknowledgement of that reality today.
Do you think that foreign policy will change significantly under his leadership?
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot has been made of the fact that he describes himself as a sort of military geek, a defence geek. He has been defence minister, as you say, and he loves building model ships. I mean, he's always talking about the military and defence. But he's also made this comment repeatedly about an Asian NATO. This is the thing that many people have latched onto. What he's saying is Asia needs to be a bit more independent. It needs to have a collective security within the region. It needs to stand on its own 2 feet. Now, this is always a huge red flag as far as Beijing is concerned. So whether that happens, it seems unlikely. But his point is, he wants to see Japan and Asia be a bit more independent on defence and not depend on the US quite so much.
And who's likely to be in his cabinet?
Yeah, he was asked that question in the press conference. Very careful not to say, I have to say. He didn't name a single person. So the next question was, well, what about the party general? That's a key role, the LDP, who's going to be the party general? And he said someone who's good at winning elections. I think it's hard to say at the moment. He will have to be thinking about unity. And he's obviously got these big figures who've all shown their cards. They all wanted to run the party. So the question is, as he himself has been, where do you put these people? Do you keep your enemies close or not? And I think when Shinzo, he was defeated by various prime ministers. Shinzo Abe thought, OK, we'll keep him fairly close, but not too close. He's had these roles in the cabinet like economic revitalization of the regions. These are not, necessarily very sexy posts, but definitely important for the LDP and a big subject for Japan. How do you reignite the rural economy? So I think he'll be looking at all these posts. He's only just won, so early days. But yeah, he's going to have to tread very carefully, I think.
And finally, Fiona, what's been the reaction to his election within Japan?
Yeah, I think it's been a bit of a shock that particularly Sanae Takaichi seemed to come from nowhere to be a front runner. I think that was a surprise. A lot of people were a little bit alarmed. She's so, she's a nationalist. She's very hard on a lot of subjects. And in spite of being a woman, she is not very good on women's issues. So I don't think women were excited to have her as a prospect. So I think some people feel, OK, after all this drama, young Shinjiro Koizumi, the new face, he let himself down with various comments that went down. He talked about labour deregulation in a way that was not very detailed and really set off a few alarm bells. So, yeah, I think the feeling is that after all the drama, they've elected the older veteran. How predictable, how LDP and how Japan. So I don't think there'll be a huge amount of surprise in spite of the last few days, which have been pretty exciting by Japanese political standards.
Fiona Wilson in Tokyo, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. It's 12:16 here in London. Now, Guy Delaunay is Monocle's Balkans correspondent, and he joins me now down the line to give us a roundup of news from the region. Hello to you, Guy.
Greetings, Georgina, and hello, everybody.
Is absolutely filthy weather there as it is here?
It's just a bit miserable, to be honest with you, Georgina. I mean, summer has come to an end, and no mistake, that's for sure. But it's not filthy. I've seen what it's like in London, and we're not nearly as dirty as that, thank you very much.
Now, it's a bit miserable in North Macedonia, too. They've implied it's a little like a Samuel Beckett play.
Indeed, they have. And the play in question would be Waiting for Godot. And the Godot in question would be membership of the European Union. And the Prime Minister, Christian Mickoski, is extremely cheesed off because we've just heard this week that the European Union has decided it is going to decouple North Macedonia's EU accession process from that of its neighbour Albania. And this looks awfully like North Macedonia is being left behind, not quite ditched in the water, but certainly left to do the doggy paddle while Albania forges on doing the front crawl, because North Macedonia's had some problems with its other neighbour, Bulgaria, over various... I mean, these issues are just ridiculous to outsiders, Georgina, but basically, in essence, Bulgaria wants North Macedonia to acknowledge Bulgarian heritage, and really, truly, they believe that people in North Macedonia are Bulgarians in denial. And they want some sort of acknowledgement of this in North Macedonia's constitution. The current government isn't in the mood to give them this. That means their EU accession talks are stymied, and Brussels has thought, well, there's no need for Albania to be stymied as well. So we're going to decouple these processes. But Mr. Mickoski and quite a number of other people in North Macedonia are very, very browned off about this indeed.
I can imagine. And, of course, Viktor Orban of Hungary is in North Macedonia today. What's he up to?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Hungary's just decided it's going to give quite a big whack of money to North Macedonia, about €500 million. And there's a joint session of they do this a lot in this region, have joint sessions of government going on with the government of, I guess, the cabinet of Hungary and the cabinet of North Macedonia having some sort of shindig together on the banks of Lake Ohrid. That, though, is symbolic of, something which is a bit problematic here on two fronts. Firstly, we all know how lovely and cooperative Viktor Orban is with the other member states of the European Union. And the second thing is that Hungary gave succor to the former Prime Minister of North Macedonia, Nikola Gruevski, who was fleeing corruption charges. He absconded from those, and he's currently at large in Hungary, and his party now, with Mr. Mickoski, is back in power in North Macedonia. So if you're looking for, good news and progress for North Macedonia, this isn't the day to be doing it.
No, and of course, as we know, at the end of Waiting for Godot, he never actually turns up.
Quite so. And how many years is it now? 21 years on from the Thessaloniki Declaration, where the EU said, we want you in. And, I think Beckett may have had a point.
Let's move on, if we must, to some football news.
Well, it's not exactly football news as such. I mean, I'm not going to talk to you about, Partizan and Red Star or any of that sort of shenanigans, Georgina. But this is quite a big deal. Albania and Serbia are going to jointly host the European Under-21 Football Championships for men in 2027. Now, anybody who followed the recent, senior Euro Championships will probably remember that Albanian and Serbian supporters were chanting very nasty things about each other during that tournament. One Albanian player even got banned for 2 matches for leading anti-Serb chants at one of the games. And now these two countries are going to come together and actually host a fairly significant international tournament. Because if you are into football, which clearly you're not, Georgina, but if you are into football, then the Euro Under-21s is where you're going to see the talent of tomorrow, the players who are going to be lighting up the big leagues in Europe in the years to come. And for that to be staged between Albania and Serbia is really quite something. It's the biggest rapprochement in the region for quite some time.
Interesting stuff. As you say, yeah, a bit more than just the beautiful game. Speaking of beauty, beautiful inside and out is how Elon Musk has described Giorgia Meloni. And I'm sure going to a Meloni-themed restaurant would be heaven for him. I'm not sure that we would all want to dine surrounded by 70 portraits of Italy's Prime Minister. Where can we find that particular restaurant?
You can find this particular restaurant in the port town of Shëngjin in Albania, and it is called Trattoria Meloni. And it's been opened by a chap called Gjerg Lutza, who's a restaurant owner who is described in the pieces I've read about it as being close to Albania's Prime Minister Edi Rama. That could cover a multitude of sins, couldn't it? But there are, as you say, 70 portraits of Giorgia Meloni in this restaurant, which bears her name. And there's a smiling Meloni, a serious Meloni, an angry Meloni, a Meloni as a child. I don't know if there's one of her as the Madonna, but, who knows? There could very well be. And Mr. Lutzer says, when cuisine, art and politics come together, you can make beautiful things.
But Guy, I mean, its location is important, isn't it?
It's a very, I suppose, a piquant location indeed, because this is right next to where Albania and Italy are going to be cooperating on these asylum processing centres, which have caused a lot of controversy and also, in the United Kingdom at least, a lot of interest from Keir Starmer lately. So these centres are quite long awaited. They are in Shëngjin or nearby. And they've been delayed in their opening, but they should be opening in the coming weeks. Now, one just wonders whether the staff at those centres will be frequenting the trattoria as their lunch hour or end of work hostelry. But yes, it is a little bit high. Well, put it this way, I think Mr. Lutz's motives may not be entirely pure.
And I wonder what's on the menu. A bit of Meloni with Parma ham, perhaps.
It's seafood. Sounds fishy to me, Georgina.
Guy Delorne, thank you very much indeed. You're listening to The Briefing on Monocle Radio. Now to some financial news with rather surprising geopolitical implications. The Italian bank UniCredit has been busy buying up shares in Germany's second largest bank, Commerzbank, and is considering a possible takeover. The leadership of the two banks are meeting today while a diplomatic fight has been going on behind the scenes. Many German politicians are resisting the takeover, which is drawing the ire of the Italian government. Well, Francesco Castelli is head of fixed income at Banor Capital and joins me down the line now. Francesco, how much of Commerzbank does UniCredit now own?
Well, we don't know exactly, but what they made available as public information is probably they've already crossed the 21% line, so they are the largest shareholder of the bank. A part of it is owned with derivatives, so complex transactions where you don't still own physically the shares. And for this, they will need an approval from the ECB to physically receive these shares, but they should be able to get it. UniCredit is already a German bank. They've been owners of a local bank for 20 years now. So it shouldn't be a surprise that they try to increase their footprint in Germany.
So why is it so controversial that they want to take over Commerzbank, and how serious are they in that aim?
I think they are really serious. It's actually Commerzbank is relatively small as a bank to the size of UniCredit. Of course, that's as a matter of national pride from the German angle. Accepting the need of an Italian bank buying one of your own German banks is certainly controversial, right? Politically speaking, and especially if you think that there are political elections next year. So probably no politician feels the urgency of granting a political blessing to a transaction that might be seen in Germany as losing national pride. The other side, Germany is a very fragmented market. The banks are relatively small there. And I've attended a financial conference a few days ago. There were a lot of German people. And these guys, they're business guys, they are bankers. They said, listen, Francesco, everybody knows that Commerzbank is very small. They need a partner, right? Maybe having an Italian partner is not what politically fits the narrative, but they need a partner, right?
I mean,
Italians
are complaining, though, that Germany had no problem with everyone buying Italian companies during the financial crisis, but they're now balking at the opposite. Do they have a point?
Yeah, I mean, bear in mind that German Lufthansa just bought the Italian flagship carrier, Alitalia, right? And so it's very bizarre that a few months later, the German government tried to stop a takeover. On the other side, if you look at the official response of the German government over the last 2 days, has become much more nuanced, because of course they cannot go in, especially in Europe, and say, "Listen, guys, we said we want a strong and more united banking system, but of course nobody can buy our banks." Is untenable, right? Politically speaking. So the latest position of the German government is not up to us to stop a transaction. It's going to be Commerzbank role to prevent a transaction, or better, to make sure that a transaction is the interest of all stakeholders. And the concept of stakeholders is very important, because we have to remember this is continental Europe, right? Banks are not just a profit maximizing entity. They are entities that have to work for the greater social good, and so when you hear the new CEO of Commerzbank, just elected, by the way, just named, Bettina Orlop, she said, "I need to make sure a possible transaction will be in the best interest of all stakeholders," which means shareholders, of course, but means also employees, means also clients. And so, yes, the opposition, of course, officially is very strong. My feeling is that the actual move of, well, first of all, the German government has limited options. They can withhold their own 12%, but UniCredit is already on a 20%. Right, so it's there's very little they can do to stop a transaction. Of course, they can put a lot of political obstacles, a lot of obstacles with unions, and so that's the way they might choose to block a transaction. But as long as UniCredit is able to put up a plan where both banks will become stronger, I don't know, politically speaking, it would be very bizarre if they refuse a transaction.
Francesco, thank you. That's Francesco Castelli, Head of Fixed Income at Banor Capital. And finally, it's Friday, so it's time to look back at the events this week with Andrew Mueller.
We learned this week that things in the United Kingdom, and who knows, maybe the world entire, would be better if Liz Truss, who listeners may recall spending less time in 10 Downing Street than some guided tours, was still in charge.
I can't wait to see where this goes.
Okay. Tell me more.
Let's see where this goes.
We learned this from no less an authority than...
If the mini-budget hadn't been undermined by the economic establishment, things would be different now.
This much is conceivably true in that different can also mean barefoot and wild-eyed neighbourhood militias armed with pitchforks grimly defending the allotments in which they grow the turnips which have become Britain's staple diet and currency. However, we learned that Truss believes that her country, and clearly much more importantly herself,
was undermined by the economic establishment.
Those guys, with their shenanigans. We did not learn from Truss's weird little oration delivered from in front of a bookcase of volumes sorted by colour.
What?
What's the point of that?
Indeed, who was responsible for this?
My government was forced out of office.
Possibly because she cared to remind neither her audience nor herself that her government was forced out of office by the governing party which she was leading at the time. Anyway, sticking with the subject of people from whom we thought we'd heard the last.
Daily news, daily blues. Pick up a copy anytime you choose.
We learned that little bit more about what the incipient AI revolution promises for journalism.
Oh no.
We learned that venerable London daily newspaper, the Evening Standard, now relaunched as less venerable London weekly newspaper, the London Standard, a process which involved sacking 66 live journalists, has decided instead to apply jumper cables to a dead one. Specifically, this one.
If you look at this piece of sculpture, it is more than faintly ridiculous.
We learned that, yes, the London Standard proposed to adorn its first edition with an AI-generated column written in the irascible style of the late art critic Brian Sewell, who died in 2015 and has presumably therefore now racked up nearly a decade of acerbic but meticulously enunciated complaints about the clouds and critiques of the harp playing. In fact, if this is a thing we're doing now, let's see what happens when we ask AI to furnish acerbic but meticulously enunciated complaints about clouds and critiques of harp playing in the style and voice of Brian Sewell.
Clouds, those transient drifters, obscure the heavens' artistry, much like a harpist's dulcet tones, which, while ethereal, often descend into sentimentality, drowning genuine emotion beneath a cascade of predictable notes.
To be clear, that is literally what we just did, i.e. asked AI to write something irritable about clouds and harps in the style of Brian Sewell and ran it through a voice simulator program. We are not making this up, we are all doomed, etc. Anyway, we learned unusually in both the current and historical context of good news for Russia. Steady on. We learned that there had been a response to Russia's recent offer to beleaguered subjects of the decadent woke West no longer able to walk their streets without being forcibly converted to vegetarianism or ushered by shotgun into a gay marriage to relocate to Russia, where it is promised there are no destructive neoliberal ideological attitudes. We learned that citizens of the United Kingdom had been especially excited at the prospect, the Russian embassy in London, and would they lie to us about anything ever, would they, triumphantly announcing the numbers of prospective emigres as 34. We learned when we looked it up in search of a comparison that as of the most recent British census, the number of Russian-born folks voluntarily resident in the UK was 59,781. So we would appear to have learned that destructive neoliberal ideological attitudes do have something going for them. Can I get some general muttered agreement?
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe people prefer living somewhere they can express a view contrary to that of their government without being deported to the salt pile, tipped out of a window, or shanghaied into a muddy trench on a moribund front line in a pointless war. Who can say? But on which subject, and returning to that theme of actually good news for Russia, we heard an upbeat assessment of Russia's prospects in that pointless war from Moscow's ambassador to the United States.
Biden says, we will not leave until we win. What happens if they win? That's what they do, is they fight wars. As somebody told me the other day, they beat Hitler, they beat Napoleon. That's what they do, they fight.
We learned, however, when we consulted the history books, that the someone who told Ambassador Trump this, who we're absolutely certain really exists, obviously, may need to brush up somewhat on their Russian military history, which, though it does embrace a lot of fighting, is not what the impartial observer could call an unblemished record of victory. It would have made, in fact, a neater ending to one of these monologues if Ambassador Trump had made this boast a month ago, around the 110th anniversary of the Battle of Tannenberg. But we can only work with what the news gives us. For Monocle Radio, I'm Andrew Mueller.
Many thanks to Andrew. And that's all for this edition of The Briefing, which was produced by Anita Riotta. Our researcher was Sana Jamani and our studio manager was Flynn Simons. The Briefing is back on Monday at the same time. I'm Georgina Godwin. Goodbye and thanks for listening.